There is a story that has been quietly sitting in the archives of scientific history for nearly 50 years, a story that only now, in the summer of 2026, has been fully told. It begins not in a laboratory, not in a lecture hall, but in a small Thai restaurant in Glendale, California, sometime in the late 1970s. Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, was having lunch with his friend Ralph Leighton. Leighton faced a dilemma that every human being has faced at some point. Should he order his favorite dish, the ginger chicken he knew he loved, or should he explore the rest of the menu, risking disappointment for the possibility of discovering something even better? Most people would have shrugged, made a choice, and moved on with their meal. But Feynman was not most people. He pulled out a piece of paper, began scribbling furiously, and promptly claimed he had found a mathematical solution to the problem. The notes he produced that day remained a mystery for decades, partially deciphered, partially misunderstood, until this very year. On June 1st, 2026, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences published a landmark study that finally resolved Feynman's restaurant problem. Researchers not only deciphered his cryptic, spidery handwriting, but proved that his solution was mathematically optimal. In an experiment with 2,520 participants, they found that human beings, without knowing it, make decisions that closely approximate Feynman's elegant formula. They found that people adopt a decision threshold that decreases linearly with the proportion of trials remaining, exploring new options early on, and settling on the best option as time runs out. The study showed that humans tend to explore slightly more than the optimal solution predicts, but that this simple strategy is remarkably effective, nearly as good as Feynman's own mathematical proof. Think about what this means. 50 years ago, a physicist sitting in a restaurant turned the mundane question of what to order for lunch into a contribution to decision theory, a field at the intersection of economics and psychology that analyzes strategies in one-person games. He transformed a trivial annoyance into a profound insight about how human beings navigate uncertainty. And half a century later, science has caught up with him, confirming that his intuition was not just clever, but precisely correct. This is the mind of Richard Feynman at work, the refusal to let any question, no matter how small or silly, pass by without examination. This is the essence of a life lived in the service of curiosity. Feynman's restaurant problem is more than a charming anecdote. It is a window into his entire philosophy of life and learning. He saw the world as a vast, interconnected web of puzzles, each one worthy of attention. He did not compartmentalize his intellect, saving it only for important things like quantum electrodynamics. He applied the same rigorous, playful curiosity to everything, to wobbling plates, to safe cracking, to bongo drums, to the behavior of ants, to the question of whether to order ginger chicken or try something new. He once said, "The prize is the pleasure of finding the thing out, the kick in the discovery, the observation that other people use it. Those are the real things." The joy was never in the answer itself. The joy was in the asking. The joy was in the process of figuring something out, no matter how trivial the subject might appear to others. This is the first great lesson we can draw from Feynman's life. Curiosity does not need justification. It does not need to be productive. It does not need to be useful. It does not need to lead to a Nobel Prize. It is its own reward. Feynman had a strong instinct to understand things by doing them, not by reading about them. He didn't want descriptions, he wanted participation. When he was a teenager, he repaired radios without schematics. When he was a graduate student at Princeton, he spent months working out the mathematics of a wobbling dinner plate, and that work indirectly led to his Nobel Prize-winning theory of quantum electrodynamics. He followed his curiosity down every rabbit hole, trusting that the journey itself was worthwhile. He believed that intelligence grows through curiosity, patience, and honest questioning. He rejected the idea that genius was some innate, almost magical gift. He said that what separated him from others was not an impossibly high IQ, but a simple daily mental habit, the habit of trying to understand ideas from their roots, of stripping away confusion until only the essential truth remained. This habit has a name. It is called the Feynman technique, and it is one of the most powerful tools for learning ever devised. The core idea is devastatingly simple. If you cannot explain a concept in plain, simple terms, you do not really understand it. Feynman believed that overly complicated language often masks a shaky understanding. Someone who truly grasps an idea should be able to break it down into its simplest components and explain it to a child. He applied this principle ruthlessly, not just to physics, but to everything. He refused to accept hollow explanations. He treated sophistication as a red flag, not as a sign of depth. If an idea sounded impressive but didn't actually make sense when explained plainly, he knew something was wrong. The Feynman technique is a learning loop. Explain, find gaps, repair, simplify again. It is a deliberate cognitive intervention designed to dismantle the illusion of competence. It forces you to confront what you do not know, to expose the gaps in your understanding, and to rebuild your knowledge from the ground up. This is not just a technique for students. It is a philosophy of intellectual honesty that applies to every domain of life. How often do we hide behind jargon and buzzwords? How often do we use complicated language to mask our own confusion? How often do we pretend to understand something because we are afraid to admit that we don't? Feynman would tell you to stop. He would tell you to strip away the labels, to watch the bird instead of memorizing its name in every language. He learned this lesson from his father, who took him for walks in the woods and taught him that knowing the name of a bird in Italian, Portuguese, Chinese, and Japanese taught you absolutely nothing about the bird itself. The name is not the knowledge. The label is not the understanding. The real knowledge lives in the details, in the observation, in the patient, honest work of figuring things out for yourself. Another essential pillar of Feynman's philosophy was his radical commitment to not fooling himself. He famously said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." This is not a casual observation. It is a warning. Your own brain is wired to protect your ego, to weave stories that make you look good, to remember successes and forget failures. You are the easiest person to fool because you are the one who most wants to believe in your own rightness. Feynman understood this deeply. He knew that self-deception is the greatest obstacle to truth. He knew that the only defense is a relentless, almost uncomfortable dedication to testing your own ideas against reality. He said, "We are trying to prove ourselves wrong as quickly as possible because only in that way can we find progress." Think about that. Most people try to prove themselves right. Feynman tried to prove himself wrong. He actively sought out disconfirming evidence. He looked for reasons why his ideas might be mistaken. He treated mistakes not as failures, but as signposts, revealing where understanding ended and where learning could begin. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive lesson in all of Feynman's philosophy. In a world that rewards confidence, certainty, and the appearance of knowing, Feynman celebrated doubt. He said, "I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it is much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong." He believed that when people cling too tightly to correct answers, they stop asking better questions. Doubt keeps the mind flexible. Uncertainty leaves room for discovery. Progress depends on resisting the comfort of absolute truths. He argued that if we will only allow that, as we progress, we remain unsure, we will leave opportunities for alternatives. In order to make progress, he said, one must leave the door to the unknown ajar. This is not a celebration of ignorance. It is a defense of curiosity. Feynman was not saying that knowledge is worthless. He was saying that the pursuit of knowledge is more valuable than the possession of it. He was saying that the willingness to admit uncertainty is not a weakness but a strength. It is what keeps us open to learning, growth, and change. It is what prevents us from becoming trapped in our own assumptions. It is what allows us to see the world as it truly is, rather than as we wish it to be. Feynman's philosophy has never been more relevant than it is today. We live in an age of information overload, of confident opinions and quick answers, of social media echo chambers and algorithmic confirmation bias. We are constantly bombarded with claims that demand our belief, and we are constantly tempted to choose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. Feynman's voice cuts through all of this noise. He reminds us that intellectual honesty is the highest virtue. He reminds us that we must be willing to question everything, especially our own most cherished beliefs. He reminds us that the goal is not to be right, but to understand. There is a recent article that asks a fascinating question. What would Richard Feynman make of AI today? The author imagines Feynman sitting in the back row of a darkened auditorium, watching a flashy AI product launch. On the screen, colorful animations glide past, neural networks glowing, data flowing, arrows pointing confidently upward. A speaker explains that the system understands language, reasons about the world, discovers new knowledge. Each claim is met with nods and polite applause, and then the author imagines Feynman would be tempted to rise and ask a deceptively simple question. How do you know? He would wait for the moment when someone explained what the machine does when it fails, or how one might tell whether it truly understands anything at all. He would notice that the demo works flawlessly once and that no one asks what happens when the input is strange, incomplete, or wrong. He would hear words doing a great deal of work, and he would wonder whether they correspond to anything real. This is the Feynman method applied to the greatest technological challenge of our time. He would not be impressed by the hype. He would not be swayed by the confidence of the experts. He would ask the simple, devastating questions that everyone else was too polite or too intimidated to ask. He would demand to see the evidence. He would demand to know how the system performs under stress. He would demand to know what it means to understand something. He would apply the same skeptical, curious, rigorous approach to AI that he applied to everything else in his life. Feynman also had a profound appreciation for beauty. He believed that understanding the universe should not make it less beautiful, but more beautiful. He gave the example of a flower. An artist might look at a flower and see its colors and its shape. A scientist looks at the same flower and sees the cellular machinery, the evolutionary history, the quantum mechanics of the light bouncing off the petals. Does that scientific knowledge make the flower less beautiful? Feynman said no. It makes it more beautiful. It adds layers of meaning. It allows you to see the flower not just as a static object, but as a dynamic process, a story unfolding over millions of years. Knowledge should not kill wonder, it should deepen it. He also had an unusual relationship with authority. He had what has been described as a healthy disrespect for titles, uniforms, and expert opinions if they couldn't be backed up by logic. He did not care about prestige. He did not care about what other people thought of him. He famously said, "You have no responsibility to live up to what other people think you ought to accomplish. I have no responsibility to be like they expect me to be. It's their mistake, not my failing." This is the title of one of his books. What do you care what other people think? It is a question that cuts to the heart of the human condition. How much of our lives are spent trying to meet the expectations of others? How much of our energy is wasted on worrying about our reputation? Feynman refused to play that game. He turned down prestigious offers, including a lifetime position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, because he said the place was too rarefied, too disconnected from the messy, noisy, imperfect world. He preferred to teach freshmen at Caltech. He preferred to eat lunch in the cafeteria with students who asked naive questions. He preferred the chaos of real life to the sterile quiet of pure thought. There is another story about Feynman that illustrates this beautifully. During the investigation of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986, Feynman was appointed to the Presidential Commission. While others pored over complex documents and engineering reports, he did something characteristically simple. He asked for a glass of ice water and a sample of the rubber O-rings that sealed the booster rocket joints. Then, in front of the cameras, he squeezed the rubber with a clamp and dipped it into the ice water. When he pulled it out, the rubber was brittle and took seconds to regain its shape. He had just demonstrated, live on television, that the O-rings lost their elasticity at cold temperatures, exactly the conditions on the morning of the launch. No equations, no jargon, no appeals to authority. Just a man, a piece of rubber, and a glass of ice water. He cut through NASA's flawed reasoning, insisted on speaking to engineers rather than administrators, and exposed the cause of the disaster. In his mind, fixing radios and explaining the Challenger disaster were the same problem. In both cases, authority had obscured reality, and a simple experiment was enough to reveal it. This is the legacy of Richard Feynman. It is not just the physics. It is not just the Nobel Prize. It is the way he lived. It is the way he thought. It is the way he refused to be intimidated by authority, by complexity, by the weight of tradition. He approached every problem with fresh eyes. He questioned assumptions. He searched for the simplest possible explanation. He was not afraid to think about something for a long time. He was not afraid to make 100 wrong guesses. He was not afraid to write down 1,000 stupid ideas. He was not afraid to look foolish. He just wanted to understand. And that is the invitation that Feynman extends to all of us. You do not need to be a physicist to live by his principles. You do not need to win a Nobel Prize. You do not need to be a genius. You just need to be curious. You just need to be honest. You just need to be willing to admit when you are wrong. You just need to be willing to ask the simple questions that everyone else is afraid to ask. You just need to be willing to watch the bird instead of memorizing its name. The restaurant problem that Feynman solved 50 years ago is a perfect metaphor for life itself. We are all faced with choices. We can stick with what we know, with what is safe and comfortable, or we can explore the unknown, risking disappointment for the possibility of something better. Feynman's solution tells us that the optimal strategy is to explore early and exploit late. Try new things when you have time. Take risks when the stakes are low. But as the clock runs down, as the options dwindle, settle on what you know is good. It is a strategy that applies not just to ordering lunch, but to choosing a career, a partner, a place to live. It is a strategy that applies to the whole of human life. And yet, Feynman would be the first to tell you that the strategy is not the point. The point is the question. The point is the curiosity. The point is the willingness to engage with the world, to figure things out, to find joy in the process of discovery. He said, the pleasure of finding things out is worth more than the pleasure of being right. The prize is not the answer. The prize is the search. So go ahead, ask the question, follow the curiosity, make the mistake, admit the error, try the new dish, watch the bird. Do not worry about what other people think. Do not worry about looking foolish. Do not worry about being wrong. Worry only about being honest. Worry only about being curious. Worry only about leaving the door to the unknown ajar. That is the mind of Richard. That is the only motivation you will ever need.